is co-hosting from his house today.
Okay.
Because he somehow he forgot his laptop,
Nah.
so he went back.
No worries.
Bisa dengar nanti?
Hello everybody.
I think Andy still has an audio issues with the whole broadcasting. I guess not really
Okay.
sure what's going on, and he cannot hear us. Yes, can you hear me, Andy?
Yes, hear you.
Bisa ya?
Yeah, morning, Bante.
Morning.
Sorry, I got you outside from home, Bante. Something come up today.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah, but you can do it okay now.
Awesome. So
Very cool.
good morning everybody. Selamat pagi. Selamat berkumpul dengan kami lagi. Berharap tidak ada masalah pagi ini untuk melakukan puja bakti reguler hari Minggu pagi. Hari ini kita akan ditemani oleh Yang Mulia Bante Jayasaro. Dan beliau akan memberikan dhamma desana dengan judul Starting a Meditation Practice. So good morning everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. And like usual, we're gonna do our puja, Sunday morning puja. And today, again, Bante Jayasara is willing to give us some Dhamma talk with title Starting a Meditation Practice. So we're gonna start with Namakarapata, and then after that we're gonna give respect by bowing 3 times to Venerable Bante. Afterward, we're gonna recite the Pancasila Aradhana Parita, which is the request of 5 silas and tisaranas. And after that, we're gonna recite again the Dhamma Desana Aradhana before Bante giving us the Dhamma talk. Alright, without further ado, we start. Arahang sama sambuddho bhagava Buddhang bhagavantang abhiwademi. Sang Bhagawa yang maha suci, yang telah mencapai penerangan sempurna, aku bersujud di hadapan Sang Buddha, Sang Bhagawa. Swagato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Dhamma telah sempurna dibabarkan oleh Sang Bhagawa. Aku bersujud di hadapan Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sangha siswa Sang Bhagawa telah bertindak sempurna. Aku bersujud di hadapan Sangha. Okay, let us give respect to Venerable Bante Jayasara. Okasa Wadami Bante.
Suki. Suki. Suki.
Okasa ahang Bante Tisaranena sating Pancasila dhammang yajami Anugahang katwa silang deta me Bante Dutiyampi kasa ahang bante tisaranena sating pancasila dhammang yajami anugahang katwa silang detame bante tatiyampi okasa ahang bante tisaranena sating pancasila dhammang yajami anugahang katwa silang detame bante
Yamahang Vedamitam Vedeta.
ama bante
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa
Buddhang saranang gacchami.
buddhang saranang gacchami
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
dhammang saranang gacchami
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
sanghang saranang gacchami
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami
Tisaranagammanam sampurnam.
ama bante
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Adinnadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
adinnadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Kamesu miccāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
kamesu miccacara veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
musawada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Sura Meriya Majjapamadattana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
surameraya majjapamadattana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami
Tisradena sadding panchasilang dhammang samayititva sadhukang surakitang katva apamadena sampadetta bang. Silena sugating yanti, silena bhoga sampada, silena nibbuting yanti, tasma silang visodhe.
ama bhante sadhu sadhu sadhu. And now let's us recite the Dhammadesana Aradhana Parita. Brahma Jaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjali Yandiwarang Ayatata Santi Dasa
friends, wherever you're at. So, in my very first talk, when I first came here, I talked about, it went, oh wait, no, I'm still there. The screen went dark, but on the very first talk, I kind of like this little angle going.
Yeah.
I talked about the three, it's Punya Karyavatu, the three bases for meritorious activity, right? Dana, Sila, and Bhavana. Okay. Oh, there you go. That worked.
Oh, okay.
And in the subsequent talks, everything looks good.
Yeah.
In the subsequent talks, we've spoken a lot about Dana, a lot about Sila, but not too much about Bhavana. And the Buddha tells us in the Ovada Patimokkha, the first line is abstain from all evil. Second line is to perform what is good. The third line is to cleanse the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas, right? So I don't think I would be doing my job as a monastic who shares Dhamma with people without talking at least one talk about bhavana, about meditation. And this talk is going to be specifically about starting a meditation practice, how to get that started, what should you do, what shouldn't you do, etc. So this is kind of like my introduction, tips and tricks of getting a meditation practice started. I've been meditating now almost 16 years, something like that. I started even before I was a Buddhist. I started meditating about 3 years before I became a Buddhist. And most of that time, of that 15 years, nine of that 15 years of meditating was as a layperson, not as a monastic. So I have a good amount of years of experience, almost a decade of experience as meditating and doing a practice as a layperson. And so what I hope to do is kind of give you tips and tricks and try to help you to understand why and how we should build a meditation practice in our very busy lives. Right? In the suttas, one of the things that I always have fun at, even when I was a layperson, but whenever like a Brahmin or somebody comes to the Buddha, oftentimes when they leave, they'll say, "For we are very busy and have much to do." Right? Right? And I thought, as a layperson, I'm like, yeah, believe me, I know that. Because my job was in child protective services, so I had a job that was not just 9 to 5, but lots of emergencies. So I worked crazy amounts of hours, and I had a photography business. I was a very busy layperson, but I always had time to meditate, right? And so, if you're thinking about getting into meditation, it can seem like it's a very big topic. Lots of things to get lost in, lots of things to learn about. And that is true. But if you're just getting started, there are a few things that are most important. One of the things that a lot of people have a misconception over, like when I at my office, right, I would do meditating. I would be walking meditation, and on my breaks I would meditate. Sometimes at my desk at work I would just close my eyes and breathe and things like that. And so people started to know me as the guy who meditates, right? And then as I became a Buddhist, I had Tibetan Buddhist prayer flags up in my little pod, and I had a Zen garden for people to play with when they came to visit me at my pod, all these kind of things. So then people started to understand me as the guy who was the Buddhist, the only Buddhist in the office, right? And so because of that, because people saw me meditating, it was quite funny. In the beginning, I'd be just meditating on the park, the bench right outside the office. And sometimes people would be like, "Oh, Joe is my name in lay life." They'd say, "Oh, Joe must be sleeping. He must not have gotten much sleep last night." One person even thought, "Oh my God, he's dead," because I was meditating on this bench. Right? But then I got to understand over time that I was meditating. And, because of that, people would start to ask me questions, right? What about this meditating thing and all this kind of stuff? Or one of the biggest cop-outs that people would say is that, oh, I would love to meditate, but my mind is always so active and so busy and always going here and there. Right? And what I would tell them is, welcome to being a human being. Right? We think that this is something abnormal, like we have to get our minds pure and calm and then meditate. No. The purpose of the meditation is to work with what the Buddha said called the monkey mind. It is a normal state of our mind that our mind is going all over like monkeys swinging in trees. That's the normal state of our mind. Absolute normal. Right? Even me as a meditator for 15 years, I can be doing the 5 precepts with you guys, and because I have it pretty memorized in my mind will be like, oh, let me start thinking about something else, right? And I have to come back and say no, because then I'm going to say the wrong line or whatever, right? Because I'm not paying attention, because that's what the mind is. The mind, whenever it thinks that it's, whatever's going on, okay, I don't need to think about it, I'm going to go to somewhere else, right? So the first thing to understand is that if your mind is like that, that's absolutely normal. Okay? You know how many years it took me to realize that? Nobody told me that, unfortunately. So I had to learn it on my own. And in the beginning of my meditation practice, I was very, I like, depression and kind of, not a nihilist view of things, but like really, I didn't like myself. I didn't like people. I didn't like humanity. You meet people like this today, right? It would be better if all humans were just dead, right? I was kind of in that camp. I was very negative and I was the most critical and the most judgmental towards myself, right? So when I tried to start to change my life and tried to start to want to better this, I don't want to live like this. This is such a horrible way to live, to have your mind always like this, right? And I start to meditate. Okay, I remember, actually I still have it. I still have the CD that came with the book. I don't know where the book is, but the first book I ever bought on meditation was way back in like 2005 or 6 at Barnes & Noble's, because I love books. And so I was Barnes & Noble's and I got this book, and it was by this Tibetan, lama. The directions in there were pretty common directions, which you see all the time. Try to meditate a half hour in the morning, a half hour at night. Follow your breath, sit in a good posture, all this stuff. And here I am, first of all, at that point, I'm like 330 pounds. I have a whole lifetime of asthma and allergies, which I still do. And so like I'm trying to follow the directions and I can't do it. And I'm getting so negative about it. I was like, and then my mind's like, you're a horrible meditator. You can't even follow basic directions, right? And I got so negative about meditation because I thought meditation would actually be helpful for me. Again, this was before I was a Buddhist, years before I was a Buddhist. And I actually quit meditation because I noticed that it was actually making my mind worse. Okay? But then about a year and a half, 2 years later, I said, you know what? I need to give this another shot. I know, most of my life, I said I wasn't a Buddhist, but I like to study other cultures. My major was anthropology, and so I, had various kind of small connections with Buddhism, and small understanding. So I came back to meditate again, and at that time, I found who? Most of you know this, because apparently he's very big in Indonesia. I found Ajahn Brahm online. And Ajahn Brahm was talking about being kind to your mind and your body, and all these kind of things. And I said, you know what? Let me try this. and it's exactly what I needed. I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't even be in robes if I didn't find Ajahn Brahm on the internet. Thanks to the young gentleman who asked, decided we need to get this Friday night talks right on the internet. And so when I came back, and I didn't put any expectations on myself. I didn't force myself to do anything. Right? I said, I'm going to sit and I'm going to practice. And however long that is, that's it. When my mind and my body are done, I'm done. Right? And that was only maybe 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, that's it. Right? And I'd get up and I'd be like, okay, I'm done. But I started to do it every day, just for a couple minutes. I'm going to sit, no expectations, I'm not forcing myself. Because let me tell you something, when you start to meditate and you start to understand your mind, it's not unlike dealing with children. Your mind is just like another child, right? And if you try to force against your mind and try to punish your mind, it's going to rebel. It's not going to, because you're not as powerful, honestly, you're not as powerful as the parts of your mind, especially if you're a beginner meditator, that are really strong, full of defilements, the Mara of your mind, if you will, is very, very strong, very powerful. You can't willpower that, right? You can't, just like you can't, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old that's screaming, having a tantrum, just yelling at the child is not going to do anything. Right? You need to take steps to alleviate that tantrum, right? Or just let the child wear themselves out or whatever you need to do, depending on if you're public or private. But but your mind is very much like that child, right? So when you start to understand the mind, then you start to know how to handle the mind better, right? And so in the beginning, I didn't try to force my mind to do anything. Because what will happen is, I said, you have like a conversation with your mind. You said, let's just sit for a couple minutes, right? If you say, the monk says I should sit for a half hour, and your mind is like, I don't have time for that, I have to do this and that, and I have to take care of the kids, and I have to go shopping, and right? Your mind is going to come up with all kinds of excuses on why you shouldn't, or you can't, or you don't have enough time to meditate. But if you say, let's just do it for a couple minutes, your mind will be like, okay, yeah, maybe we can do it for a couple minutes, right? Or if you just say, you know what, I'd like to sit down and have some peace for now. Let me just try to sit and meditate, right? And your mind's like, okay, who knows how long this could be. I'm going to make sure it's not too long, because I'm going to start sending reasons why you should get up, right? But the mind will tolerate it for just a little bit. So this is why it's very important. I'm talking about all this stuff to set the groundwork so you don't kind of go through what I went through. Right? I would have loved to have somebody tell me all of these things before I started meditating, but I didn't. Like, I was the only Buddhist in my daily life until I went to the monastery to become a monk, right? Well, the only information, the only teachings that I had were online or in books, right? So there was nobody to tell me these things, which is, okay. I mean, you do have to learn for yourself, right? And you can listen to me telling you these things, but maybe your mind, maybe you're just stubborn, or you're not paying attention, or you're not listening, and you're going to have to go through it anyway. That's kind of like me. I try to learn from the mistakes of others, but most of the time I'm just too hard-headed, I'm too stubborn, I have to learn from my own mistakes. Right? I have to keep making these mistakes over and over again to learn from them. So we should go into our meditation practice understanding that it's going not to be easy. It's going to be hard. Understanding that the mind is not going to want to do it. Like trying to get a child to eat broccoli or Brussels sprouts or whatever vegetable they don't like in Indonesia. I'm sure every human culture everywhere has vegetables that the children don't like, and even adults. Right? or taking a bitter medicine. Okay? So we have to understand that this is not going to be easy. But if we want to do it, we can make it easier on ourselves and have kindness and compassion for ourselves and do it in a smart way. In a way that is going to start small and build from there. Right? That's very important. So if you have this kind of inkling in your mind, this part of your mind that's saying, let's try meditating. Okay? What I would suggest is this. First, try to find a place in your house, like if you're in a house with the family members, maybe, you go into your room and close the door. Or I remember somebody said one time that I think it was a mother, and she had multiple kids and a husband and stuff like that. And she said one time she uses her walk-in closet to meditate. So she could go in the closet, close the door, and meditate, right? So try to find, if possible, a place and a time that you're not going to be bothered. Again, don't think about, it has to be for a half hour, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever. Even if it's for 10 minutes. Just find that little period of time. Go to this place and sit down. You don't have to pretzel yourself up on the floor on a cushion. You can do it in a chair. If you want to do it on the floor and the cushion, that's good. One way or the other. But when you find that time in that place, sit down. And the very most basic practice of the Buddha in terms of meditation is what's called anapanasati, right? Mindfulness of breathing. And it's actually quite simple in terms of its instructions. Not so simple in terms of its practice, because you have to practice. The Buddha says that this one practice can take you all the way to enlightenment, right? So if your mind is kind of all wrapped up on all this and this and this and this and this, don't worry about any of that in the beginning. Heck, even I've been doing it for 15 years. When things get complicated for me in my practice, that's what I do my anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, every day. But if I get confused and things get complicated, I just go back to the breath. Breath is home, right? Breath is always there. Right? When I do guided meditations, what I say is that, our job is, we're not trying to control or manipulate the breath. Your body has been breathing from the moment you were born and will continue to do so until the second you die. It doesn't need you to do its job. It's always there, right? And so wherever you are, the breath is there. You can go home. You can go to the breath, right? Ajahn Brahm's, teacher, right? He says the breath is our real home. And going to the breath. And that's actually a very wise and very good understanding of the breath, right? Because it's always there. When we're anxious, right? Even in secular medicine and science, they talk about, if you have an anxiety attack, breathe, right? There's lots of methods, like breathing methods, that are used in society. And again, Buddha didn't make up any of these breathing methods. These, like even what we call samatha practice, developing tranquil minds, samadhi, jhanas, all of that existed before the Buddha. The Buddha learned those practices when he was trying to figure out, right, when he had his two teachers, Alara Kalamata and Udaka Ramaputta, right? So he understood these practices, right? And so these practices, just following your breath, is very, very, very ancient, right? And it has very much benefits. The Buddha tells us that a concentrated mind, a mind with samadhi, sees things as they are. Right? So even for the first years, 2-3 years, as a meditation practitioner, really all you would need to do is follow this path. Just do this one practice. Right? As you get adept at it, maybe you want to learn more. Right? Because one of the things that's a misconception is that the Buddha's teachings, right, bhavana, sowing the seeds, developing our mind, it's not just when we sit down. It's everywhere. In every one of our activities we practice. Right? When we're up and we're doing, Buddha tells us to practice clear awareness, being really aware of where we are and what we're doing, when we're doing everything. He says, walking here and there, bending and stretching, eating, even going to the bathroom, right? No matter what we're doing. So, and that's a practice you can also practice, that you can also take on, but I'm not going to go there in this talk, because that's, a bit more complicated, a bit more advanced, and a bit more into things. But following your breath is a very basic, beautiful first step. Right? This is the Buddha's, of all of the samatha practices, of all of the objects of meditation. Later on in the commentaries in the Visuddhimagga, they have 40 objects of meditation. Most of those are not in the early texts. The one object of meditation, that's not to say that they're bad or you shouldn't use them, but in the early text, the Buddha gives the easiest one, following the breath. Now, if you have allergies and asthma like me, then it's not as easy. Believe me, I know. Because following the breath, me and following the breath have never been the best of friends. It's only in the last half of my meditation career that we've started to kind of come to an agreement. But I've seen the power of it, and the Buddha teaches it skillfully and well, and this is why I suggest it. So basically what you should do is, when you sit down, finding that time and that place, say, you can make an aspiration. Say, I'm going to sit, no time limit. I'm just going to sit. And whenever I'm done, whenever my mind or my body is done, then I'm done. And that's okay. You don't need to set, you're not trying to, after many years of practice, you'll know, because you'll have wisdom, when you need to push yourself and when you need to have kindness for yourself, right? And you balance that out. Because believe me, in my early years, I was really tough, like forcing, I've hurt my body because I'm like, I'm going to sit, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, right? And then, but I didn't have the wisdom then to know when I was pushing myself too far, right? So, in the beginning, lots of kindness for yourself, lots of self-compassion, right? Don't try to push too far too fast. Just sit. And you want to try to sit in such a way, this is not the best thing for me to sit on in terms of trying to find good posture, but you want to try to find a way that you're not like, so if you're sitting in a chair, don't be like this, like, I'm going to meditate, slouching back, right? And don't be like this either. You want to try to you can use the backrest of the chair, but don't put all of your weight on it. Just slightly to keep your back up, right? You want to be in a posture that will allow your breathing to be the least restricted, right? And if you're like this, or like that, or like this, or whatever, then it's not going to be as easy. It's not going to be as free-flowing. So you want to be comfortable, but not overly comfortable, right? And so once you are set up, you've made the aspiration, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to follow my breath. No time limit. You just then, you can take 3 deep breaths. And then after those 3 deep breaths, let the breath go. From that point on, try not to control the breath. You will, though. There's no doubt, you will. That's part of wisdom. That's part of understanding. to see how much we try to control everything, right? We don't need to control the breath. The body knows what to do, but still we want to control it out of fears and anxieties and things like that, right? Just like we like to try to control and want things to go certain ways in our lives. We try to control. So if you're noticing that you're trying to control the breath, you're not doing anything wrong. That's wisdom. You're starting to understand, right? So follow the breath in, follow the breath out. That's all you need to do. Now, for some people, it's quite easy that you, most of the time, unless you have breathing troubles, you want to breathe in and out through your nose. Like if you have allergies and things like that, like me, sometimes the only way you can breathe is through your mouth. And it's not the best way of doing it, but if it is what it is, that's what it is. But if you can, mostly if you're just breathing through your nose, for most meditators, they find being able to be aware of the feeling of the air going in and out of the nose, that's where you put your awareness. Right? Some teachers will say, that's where you have to put it. I don't agree with that. Mostly because, again, it's only recently in my long meditation practice that I've actually been able to do that consistently. Because it's actually, the breath can be very refined sometimes, very hard to feel, right? So there's other ways that you can follow the breath. For some people, it's the rise and fall of the chest. Right? There are some people who literally, I've watched them meditate, like when I've done retreats. They put their hand right here. I don't know what practice that is or whatever, but that's what they do. But you can follow the chest as it moves up and down, right? As it inflates and deflates. But mostly, if you can, try to do it, follow the breath at the nose. What I'm telling you is that if you can't, it's okay. You're not going to miss out. Trust me. But it's a little bit easier if you can. And that's the simple mechanics of it. Bringing your awareness to the breath. And the Buddha says, if you can't focus on any specific spot, then just abide, understanding that this body is breathing in and this body is breathing out. That's it. That's a very basic practice. Very easy, right? Harder than it sounds in practice, but that's okay. And then, after maybe 10 seconds of following your breath, your mind's going to say, I'm bored, let me think about something. Let me think about something that happened in the past. Maybe it's an anniversary day of something that happened in the past. Or maybe you have anxieties or desires about something that's going to happen in the future. You're like, ooh, what am I going to have for dinner? Or I can't wait to meet this person or whatever, right? Your mind is going to start to decide that this is not important. This is boring. I'm going to start thinking of something else, right? That's normal. Again, that's your mind showing you its craving. That's your mind showing you how it works. There's no need, and you might get judgmental like I did. You might get judgment. You might see judgment arise in your mind. You shouldn't be doing this, right? You might see criticism in your mind, but try not to get wrapped up in that. Just try to see that, okay, there's criticism there. It's okay. That's where self-compassion comes in, right? To be compassionate for yourself, right? You say, okay, I'm not there yet, right? I'm not an arahant, right? I'm not an advanced meditator, right? It's okay. I'm just practicing, right? So when you get distracted, when your mind decides to go somewhere else, maybe you're in America and your mind goes across the world to Indonesia, right? Or the reverse. Or you're like, oh, maybe I always wanted to go to Egypt or to Paris or to wherever, right? Your mind's going everywhere. Or maybe I want to go to the other side of the universe, right? Your mind is going all over. That's the monkey mind, right? So when you notice that your mind has been distracted off the breath, for a long time you might not notice because you got wrapped up in the thought. And then it feels kind of like, have you ever driven? Maybe you're driving a long distance and you kind of, maybe it's at night, and you kind of get like zoned out, right? You're still driving, but then you notice you went 20 miles and you don't remember anything about the last 20 miles, right? You're still alive, you're still driving, but you kind of went somewhere. And then you came back and you're like, whoa. It's like you get dropped back in your body. Where was I the last 20 miles, right? That's what happens in meditation, right? Because you don't realize that you get knocked out, and then you come back, and you go, oh wait, I'm supposed to be following my breath, right? So when you have that feeling, you have that understanding, oh, I got distracted, you just simply acknowledge that you've been distracted, practice letting go of the distraction, and return to the breath. That's it. Over and over. The first minute that you're meditating, you might get distracted away from the breath 10 times. That's okay. That's normal. 10 times, acknowledge that you've been distracted, practice letting go, and return to the breath. It's just like learning to ride a bike, learning how to play a piano, or whatever skill, whatever habit you're developing, it's just like that. Right? You are, over time, over long periods of practice, trying to develop your mind so that it is able to focus on a single object, in this case the breath, and to develop a skill to have your mind be calm and quiet and peaceful. And when you develop that skill, you could be anywhere. So this is what I tell people: if you've developed your practice enough, what's going on in the external doesn't matter, right? You could be, I tell people, you should go, if you think you've practiced enough, go into 42nd Street in Times Square and then meditate and see how it goes, right? Hey girls. I've done that. Right? And, well, maybe it's a little bit easier in Times Square because if there's enough noise, it just becomes like an ocean. You know what I mean? But I've been in the middle of New York City and I was like, okay, I'm going to meditate. Right? This is in my mind can be very calm and peaceful. Right? So, this is normal. It's perfectly natural that your mind is going to be distracted. That's just the way it is. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't fail as a meditator. This is how it is. So, you practice letting go, and you come back. What does it mean by practice letting go? So if you have a thought arise, say, what am I going to make for dinner? Right? You can react to that in two ways. That's a distraction. You can say, I'm not supposed to be thinking about dinner. I can't believe this stupid thought came into my mind. And you try to squeeze it out of your mind. You try to push it away. Right? That is not going to help you. That's going to make it worse. Right? So we're not trying to ever force anything out of our mind. We're not trying to force anything in our mind. Right? Because that is trying to control. What we're trying to do is see things as they are. Right? So we don't want to try to push it away. Right? We should be like, I'm not supposed to be thinking about these things. I'm supposed to be meditating. Bhante said this is how I'm supposed to be doing it. Right? And what happens? You get more agitated. You get more anxiety. You get more angry because you're not doing it, quote unquote, the way it's supposed to be done. Right? So that's important. You don't want to do that. But neither do you want to get involved in it. Like your thought comes up, ooh, what should I have for dinner? And then all of a sudden you're like, what's in the pantry? What's in the fridge? Ooh, I don't want that today. I want this today, right? And so you're just starting to think about all the different ways that you can make dinner and what you want for dinner. right? That's getting wrapped up in it. That's the opposite side of craving, right? The craving is two sides of the same coin. Not liking, pushing away, and liking, clinging, getting wrapped up in something, right? Two sides of the same coin. So that, you know what that is doing? That's giving energy to that thought. That's giving, and that's taking you away. So what you want to try to do, and this is why I say practice letting go, because it's not easy, right? This is a practice. You recognize, okay, I don't want to get wrapped up in this thought. It arose, it's there, that's fine. Let me let it go, let it be, and come back to the breath. And that's simply it. That is it. Just do that practice. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Doesn't matter. Sit down. Follow your breath. When you get distracted, practice letting go. Return. Get distracted again. Practice letting go. Return. Get distracted again. Practice letting go. Return. Just like you're learning to play the piano. You keep messing up a key. And you keep starting over again. You keep going back. The same thing. Just like learning to ride a bike or a skateboard. You get on the bike, you're going good, and then you fall over, right? And you get back up, and you keep learning, reading, practicing the bike again, and you fall over, and you get back up. It's the same thing. You're developing a habit. You're developing a skill. Right? So if you understand it from this regard, then you can understand, okay, I am going to start small, and I'm going to build from there. Okay? So once you actually start to develop a consistent daily practice for 5 minutes, right, that's the most important thing. Consistency is more important than length. Don't worry about Bhante says I have to meditate for 30 minutes. Don't worry about that. That's just a trap. That's just a trap for your suffering. Trust me, I know, I've been there. In the beginning, it's better to just sit for however long you're going to sit. And when you're done, you're done. But then next day, come back. I'm going to sit, make the aspiration to practice, however long, okay. You know what happens? Once you build it up as a practice, you start to see a benefit for it. Even if at first, the benefit might not be, my mind is becoming like an arahant. At first, you know what you're going to like? You're going to like that you found this time and this place in this practice, that for 5 minutes you can just have some peace. Right? That's going to be wonderful. And then you're going to want to keep doing it more. Practicing more. And you're going to be like, I need to practice 10 minutes. Right? And again, you're not going to force yourself, but you're allowing yourself to practice more. Okay. And then 20 minutes. And then after a year, 2 years, you're meditating half hour, an hour. Why? Because you like it. You like to do it. It's enjoyable. Right? Even then, you make time for it. Right? This is what people will say. People say, oh, I'm too busy. I don't have time to meditate. I said, you can't fool me with that. Right? Maybe my preceptor, who was a monk since the time he was 11, maybe somebody who's been a monk since they were young, maybe you can fool them with that. Maybe somebody who hasn't lived in the real world, in the lay world. I have. I practice in the lay world, so you can't fool me. I say, no, that's only because you haven't found it as a priority yet. Start out small. The more you see the benefits, the more it becomes a priority for you. It became such a priority for me that me, as somebody who loved to, I always said, I'm a night owl. I'm not a morning person. I like to stay up all night till 1 o'clock in the morning playing video games or whatever, right? I don't like waking up early. I like to be up all night. Right? So my whole life, that's what I did. I stayed up late, woke up, didn't want to wake up too early, But then I decided, you know what? My meditation practice was like, let me try waking up in the morning. Right? And so I literally switched my whole, I'm an evening person, right? All right, I switched that whole thing and I became a morning person. And I started waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30. Started going to the gym at 6, doing my meditation in the morning, listening to Dhamma talks in the morning. All because my priority for the practice is like, this is a good thing. I want to do this. What's the best way I can do this? Let me practice, right? So I'm not saying that that's what you're going to do. I'm just giving myself as an example of what the practice does in terms of you want to set it as a priority, right? So there's a wonderful Indian couple who I knew from my time at Bhavana, and they have 2 young girls. And I've actually done meditation classes with them, and they're adorable. It's a very nice family. And they talked to me about how they actually meditate as a family, right? So sometimes that's what you need to do, right? Sometimes, mom or dad, it's hard for mom or dad to get away from the family, right? So what do? You set a family meditation time, right? A family silence time, right? You get the children involved. Trust me, children actually like it, at least up to a certain age. I helped raise my nephew. I was the father figure for my nephew from the time he was 1 to the time when he was 10 when I left to become a monk. Right? So I would literally live with my sister. We raised him, in addition to my parents as well. We had a family there. And when he was about 4 years old or so, he became my meditation guinea pig. Right? Started teaching him meditation. And he really liked it. I don't know where he got this, but he'd go, Uncle Joe, and he'd sit down and he'd have his hands like in this Hindu yoga pose. I still don't know to this day where he got that, but I've seen other kids do that too. I guess they get that from the culture. But I taught him because when he got angry, I taught him to sit and to breathe, right? And I taught him how, and when I meditated, I invited him to come meditate with me. And when he was young enough, it's funny with kids, like 3, 4, 5, maybe even to 6, right? You know what, they like to do things like sweep, and they like to do chores, and they like to do activities, right? But once they start to hit 7 or 8, they say, oh, that's work. I don't want to do that, right? Then they start trying to avoid it. Oh, I don't want to do it. I don't want to sweep. That's work. I'd rather play video games. I'd rather do this, right? And so that's kind of what my nephew did. He didn't start sitting with me anymore. But then again, my whole family didn't meditate either. It was just me, so it was easy for him to kind of escape that. But, getting the family involved is a good thing. It's a good way if you're having trouble, right? So this is, I guess, just the very basics of what I can give you today. I've gone pretty long, and I still want to have 20 minutes for people to ask questions. But remember, start small, consistency first. Don't worry about time. Don't worry about, just try to build a practice, a couple minutes a day, every day, right? And if you stop meditating, life happens, it's okay. Get back on the saddle again, as we say in America. Start doing it again, right? You do it, the week, you do it Monday through Friday, it's great, but then the weekend comes and there's activities and you forget to meditate. It's okay. No need to be, angry with yourself. Just, I'm going to start on Monday. That's it. Right? Let me get back in the saddle on Monday. That's all. Simple as that. Just keep going. No matter how many times you stop, it's okay. I'm going to get back to it. Even after 10 years of meditating, you might even go a whole week or two like, I don't want to meditate. I don't want to meditate. But then after a little while, in your mind, a little thought, let's meditate. Let's go back. Right? And then you go back because you've developed it as a habit. Right? So, and then when you sit down, follow your breath. Either through in and out through the nose or the feeling of the chest going, rising and falling. And when you get distracted, acknowledge that you've been distracted Practice letting go and return to the breath. That's the simple instructions I can give you to start out. Okay? And that's enough instructions for at least a couple years, probably. At least. Especially for beginners. Because you don't need to learn a lot of extra stuff in the beginning, because you'll just get too confused. There'll be too much thoughts in your mind, too much intellectual things. Right? Starting just with the basics. And do that. Build up a meditation practice. And then you will be doing the full Noble Eightfold Path. You'll be doing the full practice of the Buddha. Right? The full practice. So I encourage you to do that, friends. And we'll stop the talk here now and we'll take questions.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, all the Dhamma friends in Zoom, if you have any questions and you want to ask that directly to Bhante Jayasara, you can raise your hand. On the bottom right, there's a feature. It looks like Miss Harita already raised her hand. All right.
And if you are a meditator already, if you have any questions, and you'd like to ask about your meditation practice, you can ask that as well.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Harita.
Buongiorno.
Bante, I'm just positive of what you are saying. I have my schedule written on the chart. Just fixed schedule. So what happened early this morning is there was a Dhamma that I like to attend, which is at 4 o'clock was adjust time, which is 7 o'clock in Indonesia. So I start only my day at 3:30 doing my chanting, morning chant, and then usually ending with meditation. After that, one prayer. Then you can imagine during meditation, my monkey mind was so messed up because I know this 4 o'clock will be another it's Dhammadesana I would like to attend, and then so messed up, so I give up. So I could not do my meditation, and then then 4 o'clock I attended the Zoom meeting. After that, I think there is another gap 30 minutes between the Zoom meeting with this from New York service. I said again, would like to meditate, but with this gap 30 minutes, but it's messed up again.
Mm-hmm.
So because I know that my meditation time was already past, and this is like messed up my feeling now because I haven't meditated. How could I bridge this feeling that now I don't feel comfortable because I haven't meditated this morning? What should I do if such a situation come back again?
Well, first I would acknowledge that the fact that your mind is basically kind of saying you should have meditated is actually kind of like a bit more of an advanced thing, right? You've already been practicing enough that your mind's like, oh, we should have meditated, right? So that's actually kind of a good sign in a way that you've developed it as a habit enough that you feel like it's part of your day, right? And for most of people, if anything that's kind of in our day that we're used to doing doesn't happen, we feel like our day gets thrown off, right? Like, people are, every day in the morning I have my morning coffee, right? But today I couldn't have my morning coffee. My whole day's a mess, right? So that's actually that's a typical human behavior. But the important thing to do when this happens is to engage another practice, right? If we get so attached to our meditation that if we miss it, that we start to get anxious, right? We're actually making things worse, right? We're actually kind of being like, we're actually engaging in the part of our mind that is craving, right? There's going to be some times where we just can't meditate, or we miss it, right? And we have to be okay with that, right? We acknowledge it's good that our mind wants to keep doing it, but we acknowledge that and then we let it go. Right? Because then if we don't let it go, what's going to happen? The whole day your mind's like, oh, you're a horrible meditator. You can't follow the Buddha's teachings because you can't meditate. When are you going to meditate? You should meditate. You better meditate. Right? All that's doing is actually building up negativity in your mind. That's actually not helping. Right? It comes from a good place in that because of this activity that you've built up, your mind is saying, oh good, let's meditate. But even that can be a negative, unskillful thing. Right? So you have to know the balance of that. You have to, at some point you say, I didn't meditate today, let me investigate why I didn't meditate, right? So you say, okay, this happened and this happened, and you really try to analyze your day, and then you try to think, well, maybe, okay, this is where things went wrong. Maybe if I try something a little different, then it'll work, right? So instead of getting wrapped up in the, oh, I should have, start to think about how you can do it better, right? Investigate that. Think about, okay, let me see why this happened, and let me see how I can do it better next time, right? So, and that is more skillful. That's more, as we say, constructive, meaning that it's more beneficial. It's going to actually help you. Whereas, letting your mind just berate you and say, I can't believe you didn't do this. That's not going to help you, right? Over time, that's just going to make things negative. Right? So, it's good that you recognize that you missed your meditation, but examine, analyze. The Buddha tells us to what? Investigate the causes and conditions, right? Right? We need to see why things happen as they do. So we investigate why, right? So do that, right? If something happens, it's okay. I missed meditation for a day, no problem. I'll do it again tomorrow. Let me see if I can learn something, get some wisdom and insight from what happened today, right? So that's what I would suggest. Don't spend too long berating yourself, yelling at yourself about it. Investigate why, right? Because then you're doing skillful. Then you're practicing the teachings, right? Then you're doing what the Buddha tells us what to do. Know, understand why it happened, and then you have wisdom to understand to do better next time. Okay?
So it's very important to forgive yourself.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Be kind.
Yeah. In the beginning especially.
Okay, next questioner will be Gunawan from Sumatra. Bante. Go ahead, Gunawan.
Okay, also Bante.
Hello, Gunawan.
I have some question related to meditation. Sometimes during meditation, my thinking starts to think about the past that I should did something in the past, but I didn't did it, so I feel some regret on that. Please, if you have advice how to get rid of that mind, and I think I definitely will try your advice to set up a family meditation time. I think this will help me. Thank you, Bante.
Okay. So this is what happens when we meditate, right? Normally our minds are so busy. We're going through our day-to-day lives. We're very busy. Our minds are focused on lots of different things. And so it's very easy for, things that happened to us or things that we did that we don't want to think about, very easy for that to get repressed, to kind of just go hide away. Right? And then as soon as we sit to meditate and our mind is quiet, guess what happens? That stuff comes up. Right? So it's actually very common in our meditation that we start to think about the past. Think about the things that happened to us, right? And think about the things that we did that were not good, right? That's actually part of our mind. Our mind does that. Our mind always thinks to the negative. The Buddha has a practice. The Buddha invites us to do what's called sila nusati, reflecting on our good deeds, our good morality, right? There's no such thing as asilanusati, meaning reflecting on your bad deeds. Why? Because that's what our mind naturally does. That's why the Buddha says, udaka kukucha, restlessness or remorse. That's the nature. Our mind is going to do that. Right? So if you've done something bad in the past that you regret and that thoughts come up, a couple things. One of the things is the Buddha actually gives us a method of how we grow in the Dhamma. Excuse me. So somebody will come up to the Buddha and say, Buddha, I have committed a transgression, right? And they'll say that they did something wrong, they broke a rule or whatever. And the Buddha will say, indeed, foolish man, you have committed a transgression. But, this is the most important part. He says, but you have made amends, you have acknowledged you've made the transgression. Right? So you actually admit, yes, I have done this. Right? Because normally our minds will be like, well, you know, you had this reason to do it and that reason to do that. Like your mind tries to justify your actions. Right? So the first thing to do is that you acknowledge, yes, I did do this. Sure, there were reasons why, and maybe, you know, you weren't in the best state of mind or whatever. There were reasons. But you acknowledge, you take responsibility for that action. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you make amends for that action in accordance with the Dhamma. So that would mean apologizing, you know, telling the truth about that action, trying to do whatever you can if you hurt a person to make amends towards that person, like apologizing, or if you've broken something, you know, try to do what you can to make sure that that person feels like you've made amends. Meaning like you're honestly, sincerely sorry, and you're trying to make it better, right? So that's the second thing, you make amends, right? And the third is that you seek future restraint, meaning that you try not to do that again in the future. You try to do better in the future, right? So anytime you make a mistake, think about these three things. Right? You have acknowledged your transgression. You have made amends for it in accordance with the Dhamma. And you seek future restraint. The Buddha says, this is how one grows in this Dhamma and discipline. So the Buddha is literally saying the way you grow is by making mistakes and being stupid. Right? Because we are all patujana. We are all not awakened beings. So we're going to make mistakes. Right? So that's important. You understand, I'm going to make mistakes. Right? And then you try to do better next time. You make amends and you try to do better. So maybe if your mind keeps thinking of something that you did in the past, maybe there is something that you can do to make amends. Right? Maybe there is something that you can do as an action to make things better so that your mind can start to feel better. Right? Maybe, though, there's something that you can't. Maybe you had an argument with a family member and you didn't speak to them for 10 years and then they died, right? They're gone. You can't make amends with them, right? Then you have to have lots of self-compassion and reflection and understand, me thinking about this over and over and over again, is this helping me? Or is it hurting me? Right? Reflecting on that. This is not helping me. I can't make amends. I feel really bad. Let me make sure that I don't do this again in the future. And let me let this go. Right? Because if you don't, there are people who will have done an action and their whole lives they're just racked with guilt from that action. That doesn't help. You can even take an example of who? Angulimala. Right? Angulimala, the Buddhist serial killer. We know the story of Angulimala, right? He did horrible things, but he was able to practice Dhamma, become awakened. Right? If he was wrapped up in guilt his whole life over all the things that he did, he couldn't have become awakened because he couldn't have let go. Right, so if Angulimala, who did all those horrible things, can let go, so can you. right? After you've made amends, or if you can't make amends anymore, say, be kind to your mind, reflect. You have to sometimes maybe keep saying, it's okay, I've done all I can, I'll try to do better in the future, now let me let go, right? And when you do that, your mind will be like, okay, I think this is a good thing, right? Sometimes you have to convince your mind, so it won't be just one time. Sometimes you have to keep saying it for a couple weeks maybe. And eventually your mind's like, okay, yeah, I'm hurting myself. Why am I hurting myself by doing, I can't do anything about it. I've done all I can. I need to let this go now, right? And so then over time, you keep doing that, and then eventually you will let it go. And your mind will say, okay, it's time to move forward, and then your mind won't be so filled with regret. Right? So it takes time, and if it's something really, really serious, maybe you even need some kind of therapy or something like that, right? Maybe you need to talk to a therapist and also do meditation at the same time. If it's something really serious or really traumatic. But if not, then it's just a simple matter of making amends and then letting go. Of course, it's not so simple, but it takes time, but you can do it. It just takes time. Okay?
Thank you, Bante. Thank you, Gunawan. Looks like there's no more other questions. Bante, I do have a quick question, Bante. Hopefully, would you recommend meditations for someone who has mental illnesses or depressions?
Yes, but what I would recommend that they also have, like, if they have a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, I'd recommend that they work in conjunction with those people as well. So, like, for instance, I think it's a very good thing if, like, somebody who's a Buddhist person and they're a meditator, and maybe they have depression or bipolar or whatever, that they have their therapist, their psychologist, they have their psychiatrist, they also have maybe a Buddhist monk or whatever, or whoever, a teacher, and those three, the monk speaks with the therapist and speaks with, so they work together, right? I think that's very important. Again, I come from that, my line of work, I dealt with lots of therapists, and I had lots of clients, lots of family members that I worked with who had all kinds of mental health issues. So that's pretty common. And now these days, there's also I know a lot of therapists, friends, also are therapists, but also mindfulness-based stress reduction. So they actually have meditation, secular meditation, and therapy together. So I think that's very important. So somebody can, because it's very common, especially if you have a lot of trauma, it's going to come up in your meditation. It's just going to. I had a friend who, to this day, he's a friend of mine. He was a cook at the monastery for a little bit where I lived. And when he was young, anything bad that can happen to a kid happened to him. Abused in many different ways, all kinds of stuff. And so he has lots of severe trauma. Right? And he's been meditating for 15, 16 years. But even still to this day, when he's meditating, sometimes that trauma comes back, right, while he's meditating. So that's to be expected, because your mind is clear and calm, and then your mind's like, okay, now we need to think about this that happened, that you've been repressing this, you need to handle this, you need to deal with this, right? And then it comes up, right? At that point, a meditation teacher is not enough. That person needs some kind of clinical help, right? And so at that point, then that person can have both their meditation teacher and their clinical help that can, cover both ends to help the person. There's a lot that a spiritual practice can help. Believe me, I know, because I know depression. I've had depression and things like that. And becoming a Buddhist and a meditator and a practitioner actually changed a lot of stuff in my mind, in my life. It basically destroyed a lot of that kind of aspects of my life that I don't have anymore, at least for the most part. But that's only from just depression, right? I don't have like bipolar or something that's real, like chemical imbalances and things like that, where you will need that support. Because anybody who has traumatic history or mental illness, their meditation, if they want to meditate, they're going to need support. They're going to need support from a meditation teacher and from clinical professionals.
Would you recommend them doing that meditations while they are medicated, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, see, this is another sad thing. Like I just spoke recently to somebody because I had the career that I did, and because I, worked with people, with both therapists and psychiatrists, and with the people who had mental health. I have experience and I understand what the medication does, right? People who don't, they won't understand, and they'll say stuff like, I just spoke to somebody on Facebook, a young guy, who said that all these meditation teachers, all these monks told him that he shouldn't take his medications because it will cloud his mind.
Yeah.
But it's actually the opposite. Somebody who has mental illness, their mind, so we already have a deluded mind. As a regular person with regular mental health, our mind is already deluded. Our mind is already, not seeing things as they are. Somebody who has mental illness, even worse, can't see. They can't even see things as they are to our level, right? So the medication is to help them to get that base level. The medication, so like this guy, he's saying, and I said, no, this is medication. You're perfectly fine to have medication. If it helps you, then it should help you be a practitioner. He says, yes, this medication is actually helping me to have my mind to be clear enough so that I can meditate, right? So that my mind is in a normal enough way that I can meditate. I said, good, that's very good. As long as the meditation is helping you, continue to take it, right? And so that you can, and then meditate, right? So it's perfectly fine to meditate while you're on any kind of medication. It might have an impact on your meditation, and you can investigate that. Like there were times, like for instance, a couple of times in my meditation practice, like when I had my weight loss surgery 10 years ago, like, before that, I meditated on things and I investigated that. And then after, when I had, morphine and drugs, after the surgery, I meditated, what does this do to my mind and my body, right? And then, so all these experiences, I use as practice, right? When I did bone marrow donation, like 5 years ago, and I had to have all kinds of, surgery and stuff like that, I used that as practice. What does this feel like? What is this what is this medication doing to my mind, right? Using that as practice. So somebody who has medications, right, they practice skillfully, they start to see their mind, guess what? They'll understand even better for them. They'll say, this medication is actually harming me, right? Somebody who's not a meditator, it might take them a year or two to understand that this medication is not good for me. But somebody who's a meditator might be able to understand because they know the mind more deeply. They understand, they've investigated how the medications affect their mind, right? And so they can know, with their doctor, they can say, hey, doc, this is not good for me, this is such and such and such is happening, right? Because they understand it more deeply. So we should understand that to a certain degree, mental illness does not preclude somebody from practicing. For instance, I've never met him, but I know of a monk he's been a monk, he's a Mahatera, he's been a monk 20 some odd years now. He's bipolar, and he's a successful meditator and a teacher and everything like that, right? So he's been able to understand and be able to still be a monk and still practice and still do all these things after many years, even though he has this very severe mental illness, right? So we should never, if you have mental illness, you can meditate, but you should do it with the support system.
Thank you, Bhante. All right, it looks like we already passed 11 o'clock today.
No problem.
So, you have any questions, Victor?
Yeah, Bande, my quick question is, what kind of, you say support, right, Bande? What kind of support we can give if somebody have severe like mental problem and even like a suicide thought, that he's being treated by a psychologist, but as a friend, what we can do to help him to have a support of him not to do what what the mental states of his mind.
So that's a very hard question, and it's a question that's really best answered by a professional. But what I would say, just in terms of just being a friend to the person, is just being there for the person. That's the first thing. Being a support system for that person, even if they drive you away, and because they will, right? If they have a mental illness, then maybe they have lots of paranoia in their mind. They would be like, this person is trying to harm me, and all that kind of stuff, right? So being there for that person, because then all of a sudden their mind state changes a month or 2 months later, and they feel really bad that maybe they were angry towards you, and you said, okay, I'm done, and I went away, right? Right? But you're still there, and they're like, oh, okay, this person is supportive of me. That's very important, right? To be supportive of that person, to make sure that they know that you are there, right? Of course, you have to set boundaries. You don't want them to harm you, right? You have to, if they're going through a manic phase or a bad phase, and they don't want you around them, well, maybe it is best that you're not around them, right? Now, if they're like suicidal or something like that, the best thing to do is to call like a suicide hotline, and they will tell you what to do, right? You want to talk to a professional. This is very important. As a matter of fact, there's a wonderful program called Mental Health First Aid, right? I took it, I'm certified in it. I took it a class at a college in New Jersey last year. And it will teach you not what to do, because you're not a professional, but it'll teach you what you need to do to make sure that they're okay until they have professional help, right? That's the most important thing. You have to be careful in try to force them, oh, you should go to see this therapist, you should do this, you should do that, because they'll oftentimes fight against it. Because let me tell you, first of all, many times, a lot of therapists and psychologists are not really the best people to be around, right? They're not really supportive, they're not really empathetic. I've dealt with dozens of people, and to have a good therapist, a good psychiatrist who's really supportive and empathetic is rare, unfortunately, right? So what that will lead to is people who are mentally ill, they will not trust them. They will say, oh, And the other aspect of it is a lot of the medications have really bad side effects, right? So they will have gone through, somebody who's mentally ill, maybe in their 30, 40, 50, they will have gone through 10, 20, 30 medications. And they will have experienced a lot of bad side effects to those medications, right? So that's an important thing to understand. So these are important to understand so that you don't say things that triggers the person and then you can't help them anymore, right? So the main important thing is to become knowledgeable about what to do in terms of mental illness with your friends and family by learning from these professionals, and to be supportive and to be there for the person when they want you and they need you, right? And to understand what they're going through more and more so you can be more supportive and do so in a skillful way that's going to help them and not harm them, right? You're not going to be able to do some kind of wave a magic wand and to do some action and for the rest of their life they're going to be good. It's not that way. Mental illness is something I would never wish. If I had a worst enemy, I would never wish it on anybody. It's a horrible, it makes me want to cry, to be honest with you. I've worked with so many people. It's such a horrible thing that if you don't have it, you can never understand. And the only thing that you can do is try to be as supportive as you can. That's it, right? Because you'll never be able to fix that person, right? The only thing that you can do is try to be a friend to that person and try to be there for that person, right? And maybe when you understand that the time is right, just kind of like how the Buddha says, like when you say something that's truthful, beneficial, and when the time is right, maybe if you have enough wisdom, you'll know to say something at a certain time that will actually be beneficial to the person. But otherwise, most of the time, it's better to just not say anything and just be supportive.
Just be a good listener, right?
Yes, a good listener, a good friend, right? And if they go into like a mental health institution, like one of my good friends, you know, he came to me and he was suicidal, and you know, first of all, I said, we're going to go to a place right now. And he says, I don't want to do it right now. Because it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. He says, let's sleep. And so I said, okay. And so he slept in my room with me. And I slept in front of the door, right? Because he came to me for help, right, first. Because he says, I'm suicidal, etc., right? And, you know, he had already called the light. He didn't want to go anywhere that night. And I know there was nothing I could do. Like, first of all, he's 2 feet taller than me. He's way bigger than me. Like, I can't physically restrain him, right? And so I said, I'm sleeping in front of this door, man. He says, you're bigger than me, but I know kung fu, so so I'll try to put up a fight, you know. And so I slept in front of the door, and the next morning I took him to the hospital. Most big hospitals have what they call a test unit, psychological evaluation and screening, right? And they're not the most pleasant of places, because the person might just be suicidal. They might not have a severe mental illness, but they go into this place and there's people there that have severe mental illness, right? So they're not the most pleasant of places, but they're the best that our society has to make sure that somebody who's suicidal or somebody who's having a severe mental break can have some kind of support, some kind of evaluation, some kind of an analysis, right? So that's, you know, that's something that I knew was the best that I could do because I had all those years of experience with people and some knowledge. I'm not a professional, but that's the best I could do, right? So there, you'll know over time what's the best thing to do, but for the most part, if you don't, the best thing to do is just to be supportive, to learn what you can from professionals, call the hotlines, talk to psychologists, get information from them, and then, go from there.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
What another thing?
I think Sis Harita has one last question. Please go ahead, Sis.
Okay, thank you, Bante. Very quick. You were saying that I need to do investigation. I know exactly what my problem is being the perfect perfectionist that is bothering me right now. Actually, I need you to give me some tips how to let it go easily, step by step. Thank you.
Very simple and not simple. So the Buddha tells us the antidote to your problem is this. The Buddha says that for whatever situation we should investigate 3 things. First is the gratification. Second is the danger or the drawback. And the third is the escape, right? So what is the gratification to being a perfectionist, right? What is it makes you feel good? Believe me, I know, I'm not so much perfectionist, but I like order. I like when I look at something and something is very zen, or everything is in its place, and it all looks neat, and it's all stacked, I actually get a good feeling out of that, right? I literally get pleasure out of seeing something that's orderly and nice, right? And when something's in chaos, I get a bad feeling. It's like, oh, this is so orderly. This shouldn't be, And so, then I get this kind of what I call like the order Nazi. Like I come out this, and so this is why when I'm in charge, like when I was running, basically the day to day of my monastery, the monastery I lived in, I had to make sure I wasn't like, letting that control freak come out because something was a little messy or something, was this. I had to be like, it's okay, right? And why? Because I investigated, even though it feels good that I want to be a perfectionist, I want things to be a certain way, I understand there's a good feeling for that. But what? There's also a drawback. There's also a danger, right? The danger, what's the danger? Because I'm trying to be a perfectionist, I'm always anxiety and I'm exhausted all the time and I'm always trying to fight against the world, right? And you're at work and you're trying to work with people and you're the perfectionist and everybody else is kind of not a perfectionist, or maybe some people are really lazy and you get agitated. Oh, they're not doing this, this is unfair, that's unfair, right? There's so many ways you have to investigate this. All the drawbacks of this mind state of perfectionism, right? All of the ways you cause yourself to suffer because of your perfectionism, right? Why am I doing this to myself? Right? That's a good question to ask. Why am I doing this to myself? Investigate the drawbacks, the downside. And then what is the escape? The escape is letting go for the craving to be a perfectionist, right? So take that thought, that desire to be a perfectionist, investigate that, right? It's good that you already know, at least you kind of see where maybe the main problem is. Now it's time to investigate that. What is the gratification for that? What are the reasons why it gives you pleasure and you like being a perfectionist? What are all the downsides for that, being a perfectionist? All the ways that you cause yourself to suffer and others to suffer because you want to be a perfectionist. And then, how do you let go of being a perfectionist? I can't tell you, I can't say a couple words and then you just let go of being a perfectionist. You have to investigate it for yourself and see why and see the suffering you're causing yourself. And then you naturally let go. You say, why am I being stupid? It's like you're a child who keeps putting their hand on the stove even though you know it's going to burn you. Right? Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep doing? You know what? Let me. I don't want to do this anymore. And then you stop. Right? But it will take you maybe years to do that. Right? But you have to keep investigating this perfectionist mentality that you have. Investigate the gratification, the danger, and the escape, and eventually you will come to wisdom and insight into that, and you'll be able to let it go. Okay?
All right, thank you, Bante. We passed 11:15, so we're gonna close. Before we close, I just want to give some information announcement. Like for those who want to give donations to Indonesian Buddhist family, you can send your donations to our account in Indonesia through BCA. Atas nama Ibu Indrawati Titra dengan kode 137-141-2889. That's the account number. And for those who has access to Zelle or PayPal in North America or has access to those, you can send your donations to wipadany@gmail.com. All right. Before we close, Bante, maybe you can give some blessings.
All right. Dukkha patta chane dukkha, bhaya patta chane bhaya, soka patta chane soka, hontu sabbe pipaniyo, etta vatta jalamehi, sabbatang punya sabbatang, sabbe deva anumodantu, ram chakantu dasanam, akasata chabumata devanaga mahiddhika punyam tam armuditva charam rakantu sasanam.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bante. So we're gonna close this puja with nama Karapata. Arahang sama sambuddho bhagawa buddhang bhagawantang abhiwademi. Sang Bhagawa yang maha suci yang telah mencapai penerangan sempurna, aku bersujud di hadapan Sang Buddha, Sang Bhagawa. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Dhamma telah sempurna dibabarkan oleh Sang Bhagawa. Aku bersujud di hadapan Dhamma. Supatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sangha siswa Sang Bhagawa telah bertindak sempurna. Aku bersujud di hadapan Sangha. Sabe sata bawantu sukitata. Semoga semua makhluk hidup berbahagia. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you everyone. See you guys again next week at the same time with Bande Jayasara. Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Terima kasih teman-teman telah bergabung. Saya akhiri dulu ya.
Thank you. So that's a live broadcast on your YouTube.